Two cops stopped an old man riding a beat-up military scooter down a quiet back road. He wasn't speeding, wasn't breaking any law, but they mocked his ride, demanded ID, told him to step off. And when he didn't move fast enough, one reached to grab his keys. "You don't want to do that," the old man said, calm, unshaken. They laughed. 7 minutes later, the road was shut down by 40 military Humvees, engines cut. Boots hit the pavement, and a high-ranking army colonel stepped out of a jeep. Walked past the officers and asked, "Which one of you detained Colonel Merrick?" Everything stopped. Subscribe before the truth drops. Comment where you're watching from, and listen closely, because what happened next, no one in that town will ever forget. Most people driving County Road 47 that Tuesday morning probably didn't even notice. In hell, I'm not sure why they would. A man in his late 70s hunched forward on what looked like the world's oldest mobility scooter, puttering along the shoulder at maybe 8 miles an hour if the wind was behind him. You know the kind of scooter they give you at the grocery store, except this one was army green and looked like it had been through a few wars itself. Jacob Merrick had been making this same trip every Memorial Day for the past 6 years. Same route, same time, same. Worn-out windbreaker zipped up to his chin like armor against the morning chill. The scooter made a soft whirring noise that probably annoyed half the drivers who passed him, but Jacob didn't care much. He'd gotten used to being an inconvenience. The thing about being invisible for long enough is that you start to prefer it. Nobody asks questions, nobody expects explanations. You just exist in the spaces between other people's lives, doing what needs to be done. The scooter itself told a story if anyone bothered to look Army surplus from the motor pool at Fort Bragg, circa 1987. Jacob had bought it for $300 when they were clearing out old equipment, fixed the transmission himself, rewired the electrical system from memory, painted it that particular shade of olive drab that every soldier recognizes even 40 years later. The seat was cracked leather, held together with military-grade duct tape. The kind that doesn't come off, even when you want it to. What most people missed, if they bothered to look at all, was the way he sat. Straight-backed hands, positioned exactly where they should be on the controls. Eyes moving constantly, checking mirrors, scanning the road ahead, reading wind patterns out of pure habit muscle memory from decades of convoy operations, where sitting wrong or missing a detail meant good men went home in boxes, and they definitely missed the flag. Carefully folded American flag secured to the back of the scooter with 2 precise canvas ties. The kind of ties you learn to make when your life depends on things staying exactly where you put them. At 7:43 that morning, Officer Jennifer Walsh was running patrol on the county road. Bored, mostly 3 years on the force, and the most exciting thing she'd seen this month was a fender bender at the Dairy Queen. She passed the old man on the scooter, slowed down to get a better look, and felt that familiar itch that cops get when something doesn't look right. You know how it is in small towns. Everybody knows everybody else. And Walsh prided herself on knowing her beat, knowing who belonged where. This old man, though she'd never seen him before, and something about the whole situation felt off. An elderly man on what looked like a 20-year-old scooter heading toward nothing but farmland and state forest, carrying what appeared to be a flag. That combination triggered every welfare check instinct she'd been trained to follow. Her partner, Officer Mike Castillo, looked up from his phone. "What's up?" "Guy on the scooter," Walsh said, already pulling a U-turn. "When's the last time you saw someone that old riding one of those things on a county highway?" Castillo squinted through the windshield. "Maybe his car broke down. Then why's he got a flag with him?" Walsh hit the brakes. "Something's not right here, Mike. Guy on the scooter," Walsh said, already pulling a U-turn. "Something's off." They rolled up beside Jacob, who didn't speed up, didn't slow down, didn't even turn his head, just kept that scooter humming forward like he had somewhere important to be. "Sir," Walsh called out, rolling down her window. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" Jacob eased off the throttle and guided the scooter to a complete stop. The brake lever clicked with the kind of precision that suggested military training, but neither officer caught that detail. "Morning, officers," he said, voice calm as Sunday morning. "Something I can help you with." Walsh stepped out of the cruiser, putting on her best officer-friendly voice. "You can't be riding that thing on this road, sir. This is a county-maintained highway. You're supposed to be on the sidewalk." Jacob looked at her through those dark glasses. "Sidewalk doesn't run where I'm going." "And where exactly is that?" "Memorial Park, corner of 5th and Holloway." Castillo climbed out of the passenger side. "That's like 2 miles from here." "You planning to ride that thing all the way?" "Been riding it that far for 6 years now." The officers exchanged one of those looks. Cops know the look that says we've got another confused old-timer on our hands. "Sir," Walsh tried again, "do you live around here? Do you have family we can call?" That's when Jacob's voice changed, just slightly, just enough. "I live about 2 miles back that way. Been living there since I retired." "Officers, I'm not lost, I'm not confused, and I'm not breaking any laws." Walsh stepped closer, noticing for the first time the way he held himself. Even sitting on that beat-up scooter, there was something about his posture that suggested he was used to being in charge. "We're just concerned for your safety, sir." "I appreciate that," Jacob said, "but I'll be at the park in 10 minutes. If that's not a crime, I suggest you let me continue." That's when Castillo made his first mistake. He looked at the scooter, really looked at it, and started making assumptions. "Come on, man, look at this thing. It's held together with duct tape and prayer. What happens when the battery dies?" "Battery's new," Jacob replied. "Charged it last night." "Yeah, but still." Castillo gestured vaguely. "You're going to be stuck out here in the middle of nowhere." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that both officers would remember for the rest of their careers. "I've been stuck in worse places than this, son." The way he said son, not condescending, not angry, just matter of fact, like a man who'd earned the right to call someone 20 years younger. "Son," but they didn't hear it. "Not really, they were too busy being cops, sir." Walsh said, her voice taking on that official tone. "We're going to need you to come with us." "No, ma'am, excuse me." I said no, I'm not going anywhere except where I was already going. Castillo stepped forward, hand moving instinctively toward his duty belt. "Sir, you're being uncooperative." Jacob looked up at him, and for just a second, Castillo saw something in those eyes, something that made him take a step back without really knowing why. "Officer," Jacob said, voice still calm as a lake, "I'd think twice before escalating this situation. Is that a threat?" "It's advice." Walsh was getting frustrated now. This was supposed to be simple. Check on the confused old man, make sure he gets home safe, file a report, and move on instead. She was getting attitude from someone who looked like he should be in a nursing home. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time. Please step off the vehicle and come with us." Jacob shook his head. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." That's when Walsh reached for the scooter's ignition key. And that's when someone about 50 yards away started pointing at the horizon. The dust cloud appeared like something out of a movie. Fast-moving, too big to be one vehicle, too organized to be. Random traffic. Marcus Chen was walking to the bus stop when he first spotted it. He pulled out his phone, not really sure what he was looking at, but knowing instinctively that he needed to record it. "Holy shit," he whispered to himself as the dust cloud got bigger. "What is that?" On the road, Officer Walsh had her hand halfway to Jacob's ignition key when the rumble started. Low at first, like distant thunder, then louder, much louder, the sound of diesel engines, multiple engines, moving. Fast. Walsh froze, hand still extended toward the scooter. Castillo looked up from his radio. "What the hell?" Jacob Merrick sat perfectly still, hands folded in his lap, and for the first time since they'd stopped him, he smiled. Not a big smile, just the corner of his mouth turning up slightly. "I tried to tell you," he said. The first Humvee crested the hill, doing about 60 memph military green with official markings, followed by another one and another, until the entire horizon was filled with vehicles. Marcus Chen's phone was shaking in his hands. "Yo, are you guys seeing this?" The convoy didn't slow down. It organized vehicles peeling off in perfect formation, blocking both ends of the road, creating a perimeter that would have made the Secret Service proud. Every movement coordinated, every position tactical. It was like watching a machine unfold. The lead vehicles took point positions, blocking escape routes. Secondary units flanked the road, establishing overwatch. The remaining Humvees formed a defensive line that could have withstood a small war. Walsh had seen military convoys before, during parades and ceremonies. But this was different. This was operational doors opened in unison. Boots hit pavement. And suddenly the quiet country road was filled with soldiers, not National Guard, not reserves, active duty, regular army. The kind of soldiers who moved like they'd been doing this their whole lives, every movement precise, every position deliberate. You could tell, just by watching them, that these weren't weekend warriors playing dress-up. These were professionals, and they were here for a reason. The civilians who'd gathered to watch went silent. You don't joke around when you see that level of military precision deployed on a Tuesday morning in farm country. Everyone suddenly understood that whatever was happening here was serious. From the lead vehicle stepped a man who made everyone else on that road look like amateurs. Tall, early 60s shoulders that had carried more weight than anyone should have to carry, chest full of ribbons that told stories most people couldn't imagine. And on his collar, the silver eagles of a full bird. Colonel David Jensen had been Jacob Merrick's executive officer 25 years ago, in a desert so far from civilization that it didn't have a name on any map. He'd learned everything. He knew about leadership from the man sitting on that scooter, and when the call came in that someone was hassling Colonel Merrick, he'd mobilized half the base. Jensen walked directly to the two officers. His eyes never left their faces. "Which one of you?" he said, voice carrying the kind of authority that doesn't need to be raised, attempted to detain Colonel Jacob Merrick. The name hit the air like a grenade. Walsh's mouth fell open. Castillo actually took a step backward. "Colonel Self," Walsh stammered. "We didn't know, we had no idea." Jensen's expression didn't change. "And that officer is exactly the problem." He turned to Jacob. "Sir, we came as soon as we got the call." Jacob nodded once. "Convoy's a bit much. Don't you think, David?" "Not for you, sir," Jensen replied. "Never for you." The road was now completely sealed. 40 Humvees had turned County Road 47 into a military operation zone, but there were no weapons drawn, no shouting, no chaos, just the kind of disciplined presence that said, "We're here and we're not leaving until this is resolved." Jensen turned back to the officers. "Do you know who this man is?" Walsh shook her head, unable to find her voice. "This is Colonel Jacob Merrick, United States Army, retired, 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, engineer officer, logistics specialist, field commander." Jensen's voice carried across the now silent road. "This man has saved more American lives than you will meet in your entire career." Castillo found his voice. We were just..." "You were just what?" Jensen interrupted, harassing a decorated veteran for riding his mobility scooter to pay respects to fallen soldiers. The weight of what they'd done settled on both officers like a ton of bricks. A crowd was gathering. Now people coming out of houses, stopping their cars, getting out to see what was happening, but the crowd was silent, respectful. They could feel the gravity of the moment even. If they didn't understand it, Marcus Chen kept filming, but now his hands weren't shaking. Now he was witnessing something important. Jensen walked to Jacob's scooter and spoke quietly. "You want a ride in the Jeep, sir? More comfortable?" Jacob shook his head. "Scooter's been good enough for 6 years. It'll do fine today." Jensen nodded, then turned to his soldiers. "Colonel Merrick proceeds to the memorial. He rides alone. We escort." 40 soldiers snapped to attention in perfect unison. The scooter's engine hummed to life. Jacob pressed the throttle gently and began moving forward. The convoy adjusted instantly, creating a corridor of honor down the middle of the road. As they passed the 2 officers, Jacob stopped. "Officer," he said to Walsh, "you saw an old man on a road and made assumptions. That's human nature. But next time remember that the quiet ones are usually the ones who've seen the most." Walsh nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. Jacob looked at both of them. "You weren't wrong to check on me. You were wrong to assume I needed checking on. There's a difference." And with that, he continued forward. The convoy moved through town like a river of steel. Slow, deliberate, unstoppable people lined the streets not to gawk but to witness. As word spread that this was about a veteran paying respects, the mood shifted from curiosity to reverence. In the lead Humvee, Jensen watched Jacob navigate the scooter with practiced ease. The man was 78 years old, riding a machine that probably should have been junked years ago, but his posture was perfect. His movements controlled his bearing, unmistakably military. 25 years ago, in a forward operating base that existed only on classified maps, Jacob Merrick had been the man who held everything together, not through shouting or intimidation, but through competence. When the supply lines got cut, Jacob found a way. When the communications went down, Jacob rigged a solution. When young soldiers were scared and homesick, Jacob was the steady voice that reminded them why they were there. Jensen had been a green lieutenant then, fresh out of West Point, full of book learning and zero practical experience. Jacob had taken him under his wing, taught him that leadership wasn't about rank, it was about taking care of your people, and that sometimes taking care of your people meant making decisions that weren't in any manual. There was one night Jensen would never forget: enemy mortars falling like rain on their position, communications down, supply convoy 3 days overdue, and 18-year-old kids looking at him like he had answers he didn't have. That's when Jacob had pulled him aside. "David," he'd said, using Jensen's first name, something he never did in front of the men. "You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to make sure the right people do." Then Jacob had spent the next 16 hours organizing a defense that shouldn't have worked, turning a logistics nightmare into a tactical victory, using nothing but salvaged radio parts and the kind of stubborn ingenuity that only comes from 30 years of making broken things work. When the relief convoy finally arrived, they found 18 American soldiers alive and uninjured, and one Colonel Jacob Merrick, who'd lost 20 pounds and gained a Purple Heart he'd never talk about. The convoy reached Memorial Park, a small circular plaza surrounded by maple trees. American flags ringed the perimeter, and brass nameplates covered a black granite monument in the center. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't grand, but it was sacred. Jacob stopped his scooter at the edge of the plaza. He switched off the motor and slowly, carefully dismounted. No one helped him, no one tried. He'd made it clear long ago that he could handle himself. From the back of the scooter he untied the folded flag, a pristine triangle of red, white and blue edges, sharp as a razor stars, perfectly aligned. It was the flag that had been draped over his best friend's coffin 40 years ago. The friend who died saving Jacob's life in a place that officially didn't exist. Staff Sergeant Tommy Rodriguez had been 22 years old when he'd thrown himself on that grenade, married for 6 months. New baby on the way, a kid from El Paso who sent half his pay home to his mother and could make anyone laugh, even when the situation was hopeless. Tommy had looked at Jacob that day, looked at the grenade rolling toward their position, and made a choice that saved 4 lives and ended his own. Jacob had carried that flag with him ever since. Not as a burden, but as a promise. A promise that he'd never forget. A promise that he'd make. Sure, others didn't forget either. Every Memorial Day for 40 years, he'd taken it somewhere different. A different memorial, a different cemetery, a different place where people came to remember. And every year he'd tell Tommy's story to whoever would listen. But the past 6 years had been different. Harder to get around, harder to stand for long periods. The scooter had made it possible to keep the tradition alive, even if it meant dealing with people who thought he was just another confused old man who'd gotten lost. He placed the flag on a small metal stand beside the granite monument, adjusted its position until it was perfect, and stepped back. The morning sun caught the fabric just right, making the colors seem almost alive. Tommy would have liked that Jacob thought he always did love a good sunrise. No speech, no ceremony, just silence. But in that silence, Jacob could hear everything. Tommy's laugh echoing across the years, the sound of helicopter rotors coming to evacuate, the wounded, the crack of gunfire in mountains that weren't supposed to exist, the voice of a young man from El Paso saying, "Tell my wife I love her," right before he made the choice that defined both their lives. The soldiers formed a perimeter around the memorial, standing at parade rest. Every one of them understanding that they were witnessing something sacred. Some of the younger ones had tears in their eyes. They'd heard stories about men like Jacob Merrick, but they'd never seen one up close, never watched a living legend perform the simple act of remembering. In the crowd that had gathered, an old woman pressed her hand to her chest. She recognized something in Jacob's posture, in the way he held himself at attention, even. Without a uniform, her own husband had stood that way once before cancer took him. Before age bent his shoulders and dimmed his eyes, she whispered a prayer for both of them. A middle-aged man in work clothes removed his baseball cap. His brother had died in Iraq 15 years ago, and he'd never known quite how to honor that sacrifice. But watching Jacob, he understood that sometimes honor is quiet, sometimes it's personal, sometimes it's as simple as showing up year after year when no one's watching. Jensen approached Jacob. "Permission to speak freely, sir." Jacob nodded. "That flag, it's not staying here, is it?" Jacob smiled. "Course not. It goes where it's always gone, back home with me. But I needed to bring it here today. Needed it to see this place. And the officers." Jacob looked back toward where Walsh and Castillo still stood at the edge of the crowd. "They're good cops, David. They just forgot that everyone has a story." Jensen nodded. "Training exercise, not punishment," Jacob said. "Education." An hour later, the convoy began to disperse. Soldiers returning to base equipment being loaded, crowds beginning to thin. But Jacob remained by the memorial, lost in thoughts of friends who never made it home. Walsh approached slowly, carefully. "Sir Jacob." Turned. "I want to apologize, not just for today, but for not seeing you, really seeing you." Jacob studied her face. "What's your name, officer?" "Jennifer Walsh, sir. 3 years on the force." 3 years. Jacob repeated. "You know what? I learned in my first 3 years of service," Walsh shook her head, "that the uniform doesn't make you special. The person wearing it does." He paused. "You've got good instincts, Officer Walsh. You saw something unusual and investigated. That's your job. The problem wasn't what you did, it was what you assumed." Walsh nodded. "How do we do better? Ask questions, listen to answers, and remember that the person you're talking to has lived a life you know nothing about." Castillo joined them. "Sir, I owe you an apology too. We were out of line." Jacob looked at both officers. "You know what you can do for me. Anything. Next time you see an old man struggling with something, don't assume he needs your help. Ask if he wants it. There's a difference between need and want, and that difference is called dignity." As the sun climbed higher, Jacob returned to his scooter. The battery indicator showed full charge. He had enough power to get home and then some. Jensen walked beside him as he prepared to leave. "You know the offer still stands. Come back, teach some of these young officers what real leadership looks like." Jacob started the scooter. "I'm doing that, David, just not the way you think." "How?" So Jacob gestured toward Walsh and Castillo, who were talking quietly with some of the soldiers. Today, they learned something they couldn't learn in any classroom. They learned that respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn. And sometimes the people who've earned it the most are the ones who expect it the least. The scooter pulled away from the memorial, slowly, steadily, Jacob's posture still perfect, his bearing still unmistakably military. The convoy had dispersed, but a few vehicles remained, providing a loose escort as he made his way home. Marcus Chen posted his video that evening with a simple caption, "Thought we were watching cops hassle an old man. Turns out we were watching a hero go to honor his friends." The video went viral, but not in the way most videos do, not with outrage or controversy, but with quiet respect. People shared it with their grandparents, their veteran friends, their kids. They shared it because it reminded them of something important. Within 24 hours, the local news picked it up. Not for the drama, but for the lesson. A reminder about assumptions, about respect, about the invisible veterans living quietly in every community. The reporter who covered it was a Navy veteran herself. She understood what she was seeing. Officer Walsh started getting calls from other departments wanting to know about the incident, not because she was in trouble, but because word had spread about the training opportunity Jensen had offered. 6 other police departments asked to be included. 5 more requested similar programs with their local military bases. The story reached the VFW halls and American Legion posts throughout the state. Old men who'd served in Korea and Vietnam and Iraq found themselves standing a little straighter, walking a little prouder, knowing that somewhere someone remembered that service doesn't end when you hang up the uniform. 3 weeks later, Walsh was walking her beat downtown when she spotted an elderly man struggling with a heavy grocery bag outside the pharmacy. She didn't assume he needed help. She asked, "Sir, would you like some assistance with that bag?" The man smiled. "That's very kind of you, officer, but I've got it." She nodded and started to walk away, then stopped. "Have a good day, sir. Thank you for letting me ask." The man looked puzzled for a moment, then understanding dawned in his eyes. "Thank you, officer, for asking instead of assuming." It was a tiny interaction that lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it was different. And different starts with small things. Jacob Merrick returned to his small house at the end of the cul-de-sac. He plugged in the scooter, checked the battery level, and went inside. The flag went back in its place of honor on the mantel, where it would wait for next year. He made himself a cup of coffee, sat on his front porch, and watched the sun set over the fields. Beyond the horizon, somewhere young soldiers were, learning what it meant to serve, learning that leadership isn't about giving orders, it's about taking care of people. And somewhere 2 police officers were learning that respect isn't about age or rank or uniform. It's about recognizing the humanity in everyone you meet. As darkness settled over the farmland, Jacob thought about the young soldier who'd approached him after the memorial. A kid maybe 21, with nervous eyes and questions about serving overseas. Jacob had given him the same advice he'd given Jensen 25 years ago. "Take care of your people, son. Everything else is just paperwork." The boy had nodded like he understood, but Jacob knew he wouldn't really understand until he was standing in some forgotten place, watching someone else's son make the choice between himself and his brothers. That's when you learn what service really means, not when you put on the uniform, but when you decide what you're willing to sacrifice to keep it. Jacob sipped his coffee and smiled. He'd accomplished what he'd set out to do that morning. He'd honored his friend, and maybe, just maybe, he'd taught someone something about seeing people for who they really are. Because that's what heroes do. They serve quietly, they lead by example, and they never stop teaching even when the uniform comes off. If this story gave you chills, hit that subscribe button. There's another powerful veteran story waiting right here. Click to watch it and let me know in the comments. Have you ever been surprised by someone who turned out to be more than they seemed?